Welcome back, guys. So we've talked before about how we can receive goods, correctly use our equipment, make sure that our equipment are clean. Using a workflow plan, we have talked about how we can communicate our days with our team members and also how we can make sure that our days are efficient. So once you've received your ingredients and you've checked your standard recipes and you know how many people you're going to cook for, you know what you're going to do for the day. Another part of being a commercial cook is that you need to do calculations, which means how do you know how much you need to order and how do you know how much you need to prepare? Well, one way of doing it is by doing calculations, which means yield is how much we actually want to achieve for that particular prep time. How much do we want to achieve to serve? Like how many customers come in and how many food do we need to actually serve? So how much we need to serve is the number of servings. So for example, the number 100 customers are coming, or 100 portions of food we need to make. And then we need to know the portion size, which means are you making a soup for 100 mils, 200 mils, 250 mils, 500 mils. How big is it that you want this portion to be? Now you know this usually from your standard recipe card. They have you the standard portion size for that particular recipe, or whatever your workplace requirements are. So from the amount that you want to serve or the amount that you want to create, you multiply by the actual portion size. This gives you your desired yield, which means how much you actually want to make. So 100 times 250 mils gives you 25,000 mils. Obviously, we want to make the numbers a little bit easier to read, so we convert it to liters. That gives you 25 liters. Another part of doing calculations in your recipes is doing conversions. This means either you want to convert the recipe up or you want to convert the recipe down. Like you want to make more, or you want to make less of the ingredient. So the way you know this is by first checking how much do you actually want, your desired yield, and then what is the yield of the actual recipe that you're using. You divide it, gives you your conversion factor, so that you can use to either increase your recipe, so you know how much flour you need to make. From a recipe that says 10, you might need to multiply by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Or you might need to divide that recipe. If you have a recipe for 10, you only want to make 5, so you divide it by 2. So aside from, like I said before, we need to make sure that we have our prep list. Then after we have our prep list, we start doing calculations, or sometimes we pre-plan our prep list a couple of weeks before or several days before, and we calculate how much we're going to do for that day. So calculation is important and preparation is important. After that, we talk about what exactly is a stock. So in the commercial cookery kitchens, everything usually has a source, or usually we need flavor in everything. So your stocks is your foundation flavor. As we mentioned before in the introduction, there's several stocks such as fish stock, beef stock, ground beef stock, white stock, vegetable stocks, fish stocks, shellfish stocks, game stock, dashi stocks, dessert stocks, or less common stocks such as possibly pork stock, but then again, if you go to Japan, the pork stock is pretty common. So the stock is containing of several elements. One of the elements is obviously water. Almost always it starts with cold water. The reason why we want to do this is because we want to extract as much flavor from the ingredients that we're using, either the bones or the vegetables. And then another main element will be the bones, basically the main flavor of the stock. So if it's a fish stock, then the main flavor is your fish bones. If you're doing a beef stock, then obviously it's beef bones. If you're doing a vegetable stock, then vegetables is your main ingredient. So within all these stocks, you always have one common thing going from stock to stock. This main theme is your mirepoix. So mirepoix is one of those things that repeats itself in various recipes. In almost every kitchen, a mirepoix is used. Mirepoix is your carrots, your onions, and your celery. So this is your three mirepoix ingredients. That's always going to follow with every stock that you make, or sometimes to enrich a sauce or a soup. Other parts of the mirepoix is sometimes you use leek, if you have it, for making vegetable stocks, for example. And then you have your bay leaf and your peppercorns, which you can't really see, but it's really small there. So your celery, and you also use parsley stalks. So the parsley leaf you might be using for your garnish or part of your recipe, but then the stalks we keep it to impart flavors. So mirepoix is a little bit like, if you imagine a band, you would have the bones is the person that's singing. This is the main component of the song, but if you don't have the mirepoix, you don't have the percussions, you don't have the people playing tambourine, you don't have the people playing drums, there's no guitars, there's no bass. So it completes the flavor of the stock. It gives it that sweetness, it gives it that extra body and the extra background flavor to your stocks. So if you were making a white stock, for example, you don't roast anything. If you were making a brown stock, a white stock, then you don't roast anything. If you were making a brown stock, then you would roast your bones and you would roast your mirepoix. Other components of your stocks, including things like aromats. Aromats are things that create aroma. So these could be star anise, for example, or peppercorns, different kinds of peppercorns, your bay leaf, things like thyme, or if you're working in Asian cuisine, then you might add your 5-spice, for example. If you're working in Indian restaurant, maybe you add some cardamoms into your stock. Then from your stock, you can get your varieties of soup. So the base is your stock, your main liquid. This then either gets reduced or added with more ingredients. So the additional ingredient then changes it into, like, for example, onion soup from France, or different kinds of vegetables that you will be doing in your recipes. Garden vegetables turns it into minestrone from Italy. Or you might make a cold soup, which is predominantly tomatoes and capsicum. This comes from Spain. Then there's other soups like tom yum or consomme or pho from Vietnam, borscht from Russia, and mulligatawny from India. And then we have our different versions of soup, so different types. Things like minestrone will be categorized as bouillons, and things like consomme will be categorized as clear soups, for example. So this requires certain other steps, which we will discuss further in our next video. The different derivatives and the different types of soups, and how to create these soups, and different kinds of sauces, and from that main sauce we get more varieties of sauces. For example, mayonnaise can be turned into aioli, for example. So this will be in your next clip. You will have different kinds of soup and the different kinds of sauces and the derivatives, and we'll talk a little bit also about appropriate garnishing and appropriate serviceware for these soups and sauces and things that you have prepared.